Got it. Okay. There you go. Hello,
Hi.
I'm Frieda.
Hi, I'm Amelie.
I'm going to close the sound. It's not going to work. Okay, too close. You hear that? Yeah. So you're going to go to the other room. Well, just away from here. Just, yeah. This should be interesting. Because I'm not the spiffiest person in the world on this. Your name is Kathleen? You're
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes, I'm Kathleen, and this is my partner, Amelie.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Kathleen Alvarez. A lovely name.
Thank you so much.
Okay, he's gone to the other room. There he is.
Okay.
Are you guys ready for us to start the interview?
Yes, I think so. Frieda?
Yes.
Okay, so we have some questions, of course, but we just want to quickly say that, wait, Kathleen, do you want to say it? Because Kathleen?
Yeah. Say what? Sorry.
That you're the 12 thing.
You should be on mute. Byron, should this be on mute?
No, you're fine, right, Frieda?
Okay.
You're fine, except if you want, do you want us to see you?
And you can't see me.
No, you have to press your video button.
Oh, Byron. See, that's what I mean. I don't know what that is.
Hold on for a second.
Okay. Wait, I see. I start video. Hold on.
This interview is going to be running a little short because I have to run to a job interview after this.
Yeah.
So we'll be finished around 11:45, if that's good for you guys.
Were you able to catch that? I don't know if you could hear.
No, I was on mute just for a second.
Okay.
Make sure Frieda was set up. And Frieda's fine.
Okay. And I'm on mute.
No, you're right. You are where you're supposed to be. Don't move. Don't press,
don't press any buttons.
Unless you want to go. Right.
No.
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can see you fine.
Okay.
You can see me, Frieda?
Yes, because you have a spiffy background.
And Kathleen's on her phone, right?
Yes, sir.
That's it. Okay, let's get going.
Okay, so we have some questions that both of you guys can answer. Let me just find them, sorry. So we did some research, of course, and we found out that you guys actually weren't born in Boston, that you guys came from New York. So I guess the first question would be why did you move to Boston? Why not just stay in New York, and why choose
Okay, so I'll go first, and then Frieda has a more elaborate story coming here. So yes, I was born in New York City, in the Bronx, and then my family moved while I was in public school. My family moved to Syracuse, New York, and so that's where I went to high school, and then I came here to go to college, and in 1960. But before your parents were probably married. And so I I liked it. I like the city. I didn't particularly like Cambridge, but I liked Boston, and I had the advantage of having an older brother live in Boston in Roxbury, and he was in the Navy. So all of those things put together meant that I got to see Boston in the ways that most of my fellow students never saw it. So because I would hang out with him when he was on leave. So we got to see a good chunk of funky Boston, not just the museums, and so all of that came together, and I just liked it. And then when I started working in the civil rights movement, I actually went back to Syracuse, worked there for a year for CORE, but always thought about coming to Boston, and came back, and then came back here, settled, and got involved in the community and liked it.
And I, ready? And I was born in the Dominican Republic. My mother, my brother, and I came to New York when I was 8 years old, and I lived in New York. That's where I grew up. And then in 1965, I came to Boston. I was married at the time, and my then husband was going to Harvard, so we moved here. And he was going to school, and I was obviously the working wife. And it took me a rough time to get a job in Boston in 1965, I assume, because I was Hispanic. But I ended up in Roxbury, which was perfect. I mean, it was a fluke, but it really made a big difference for the rest of my tenure here in Boston, in the connections I made at that time. And I graduated from the New School in New York, which is an incredible institution.
Right. So and our paths never crossed in New York. So we met in Boston.
That's right.
So the fact that we both came from New York and we both lived in apartment houses and all that stuff is a pure coincidence.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So Frieda grew up in Upper Manhattan, and so right, and then I grew up in the Bronx. Yeah.
Oh, I've been to Manhattan before, and I liked it. So.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the next question is, during like your time helping the community, was there ever like a point where you thought maybe like stopping or like taking a break? Because I know for me, I would probably think that if I was to help the community, but I was just wondering if that was ever the case for you too.
Now, no, I have I was always able, to find work in what I was interested in. Now, I was interested in several things, and I just, I was things came together for me so that I found jobs in the areas that I was interested in when I was interested in them. So I started off as a community organizer, organizing in different neighborhoods in Roxbury, but I was always interested in history and tried to use that interest in history in helping me to organize, and then had an opportunity to set up a historic institution. So a friend of mine, Henry Hampton, I don't know if you've ever had to see the documentary Eyes on the Prize, which is a documentary about the civil rights movement, but Henry did that. But he was but he was interested in this, what was then a small historical association trying to raise up more information about Black people in the history of Boston. And we had an opportunity to get to really reinvigorate that and make it into a museum. And then I started working doing that. And that became the Museum of African American History. And that's the museum that owns the African Meeting House down on Beacon Hill. And if you haven't been there, I hope you get there soon. I can't believe that Bob, your teacher, hasn't taken you there. I'm going to call them up and talk to them about that. And so, and I designed programs. Probably the program that I designed that has lasted the longest from when I was there is a walking tour called the Black Heritage Trail. And so I continued working there for about a little over 10 years. But all the time that I was there, I stayed, interested as a volunteer in local politics. And in 1982, I had an opportunity to run for office. My state representative at the time was Mel King, and he was planning to run for mayor and didn't want to be and wanted to concentrate full-time on running for mayor, and so didn't run for re-election in 1982. And I ran in 1982 and was successful and became a state representative. And that's actually the job I held the longest in my life. I was a state representative until 20. Until 18, yes. So, and then retired, and that's what I am. And I'm retired now. Still doing stuff, but not mostly as a volunteer. So, Frieda, you want to do that same period?
Well, let me try. As I said, after 2 months of job hunting, it was very rough in 1965 to get a job as a Hispanic woman. And ended up in Roxbury, but and I was disappointed because I knew that there was already a small Hispanic community in the South End, and that's where I assumed they were going to send me since I'm bilingual. But anyway, they sent me to Roxbury, which turned out to be a blessing. And I could use my Spanish with all the Cape Verdean families because, of course, in Boston, there's a huge population of Cape Verdeans who were continued to come to the city. And Roxbury, what I didn't know was, of course, that EBA which is the largest Hispanic agency in the South End, was getting ready to develop its housing. And so they were pushing the people out and they were heading to Roxbury. So the Hispanic community, in a way, was being enlarged or created. But at any rate, and my job, I was given the job of trying to help Roxbury Multi-Service Center, where I went to work after the Department of Welfare, to help them decide how they should handle the growing Hispanic population. And in that process, I stumbled upon a group of people who formed something that they called the Spanish Alliance, although it hadn't been incorporated or anything, because some teachers realized some kids were coming to school not well clothed. I mean, they didn't have proper winter clothing, and just the growing Hispanic population, which had a certain set of needs. So I joined up with them and helped them get incorporated, helped them get some money from another program that had started, the War on Poverty, the Model Cities program. And the Spanish Alliance still exists today. So it was an incredible experience, and a learning experience. I mean, in a way, as I'm describing it, you could say I was learning as I was going along, because I had never done anything like this in New York, where I grew up. So I was just continually learning and getting on committees to help deal with an issue, and I would learn, more about Boston, more about the people. And once you get started, one thing leads to another, and you can't stop.
Thank you. So the next question is, while you were like helping the community, were there like challenges? Like I know you've mentioned a few so far, but were there like any challenges or things that you tried to do that just didn't go as planned, or like something that like made you stuck at like some point while like helping Boston?
Well,
But yeah, go on, Frieda.
well, I was just going to say, I mean, the kind of work that we were doing is a challenge from the get-go, because what you're trying to do is change the society around you. I mean, change in my case, the way services were being delivered to make sure that they reach bilingual people, for instance. So we ended up creating all sorts. We had a mothers teaching literacy program. I mean, just because it became clear that the illiteracy rate was high enough that we needed to create something that was different. But you were always badgering up against the rules and regulations of what people thought how things should be done. So the whole process of community organizing, community involvement is pushing barriers and trying to create something that some people hadn't even thought about, but you realize it's exactly what the community needs. Byron?
Yeah, I think that that in the work we were doing in the community, you expected, you knew that everything you tried was not going to work, and as you did the work, you figured out where the opposition was. You didn't always understand where the opposition was in communities. And so when I was working in a part of Roxbury called Lower Roxbury, it took a while before we realized that there was actually a huge bureaucracy in City Hall that had already designed what they thought should happen in this neighborhood and never talked to anybody in the neighborhood about that design until it started to be acted on, and then people found out about that. And so that was a case where we got a sense of what was going on soon enough that the neighborhood wasn't completely destroyed, though it was significantly destroyed. And so for the victory for us was able to organize people to develop and build new housing in a neighborhood where their own housing had been torn down and let deteriorate by the city. And we had no idea why they were doing that until we figured out that they had a plan to literally move everybody out. And so that we would go back and forth on that. You'd have successes, and then in those successes, you would see where the opposition was, and that was making it slow. You would lose some battles and then hopefully learn enough so that you were more effective going forward. But personally, I certainly didn't have a period where I said I had to take off. I had to somehow take a sabbatical. I certainly had periods between jobs. Yeah.
But as I'm sitting here thinking about those times and sort of your question, I ended up, after leaving the Spanish Alliance, working for the Solomon Carter Mental Health Center, and I was the director of a project called Consultation and Education. I'm not exactly sure how I ended up there, except that I applied for the job and I got hired. But that's where I was when busing was taking place, and I had a staff of some 75 or almost 80 people, talented. I had psychologists, I got psychiatrists, mental health people that I was able to then branch out, have them go and help the communities deal with the whole issue of busing. For instance, some of the psychologists waited for the buses when the kids came back because of the trauma that they had been subjected to, of being spat upon and all of that. So it was just a coincidence. And then we started the rape prevention program. Again, it was a whole set of other issues that I had not quite confronted when I was at the Spanish Alliance, but I found myself in a very good position to be in to try to, again, address some of the problems that were surfacing.
Okay, thank you. One more that I have is, how has like your life changed since like helping the community, and like how like the people that you've impacted, how do you think that has like helped others and like changed yourself in a way too?
I guess the way it's changed me is it certainly affected my ideology. I've learned that I've certainly changed my certainly changed my knowledge about power struggles, because any kind of community organizing is a power struggle, and it certainly changed my knowledge, and that change of knowledge has certainly changed my ideology around this. I think, though, I did come out of, you know, when I don't know if you've noticed this when you read about the civil rights movement, but the civil rights movement, like most movements, had a left and a right. They had, I mean, there were you could have sort of the more moderate people, and then you had the and then you had the more radical people, and I was very much influenced by the left in the civil rights movement. And so I was influenced by people who early on came to understand that the problems people were having around discrimination wasn't because there were individual white people who were bigots. It was bigger than that. It was that all white people were raised in a fundamentally racist culture. And so that's a very different way that you approach how you end the negative effects of racial discrimination on Black people, because it's not a matter of white people saying it's not a matter of white people not saying nigger. That's not what cuts it. You see, I mean, it is white people deciding that they're not going to enjoy the benefits of white supremacy, and even though they would not consider themselves white supremacists, even though they would say everybody's the same, right? And you can usually figure out that they're completely a product of a racist culture when anytime a white person says, I don't see color. When anytime a white person says, I don't see color, right? you know, that person, that you walk away, get away from them fast. So I think I would say that how it's affected me is it's affected me in my I would say a more realistic view of the world and politics, right? And more realistic view of how then we have significant change in places like Boston.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm sitting here trying to figure out how obviously this had changes me, and two things come to mind. One, that I never, in my wildest imagination, imagined. I mean, I thought when I got my degree from the New School, I was going to go work like for the Department of Welfare. I mean, that's as far as I vision the rest of my life, and that was the work that I wanted to do. But what ends up happening is, particularly if you get engaged, fully engaged in the issues, that then you begin to see other problems and other doors get open. One of the recommendations that I make to young people or younger people is to take advantage of everything. Committees that you get on. I mean, obviously, boards, you don't get asked to be on boards till you're a little further down on you're a little older, but committees were our learning experience if they're for the right issues. And it's just amazing. there's a park. I have a park named after me. And so one person, actually, we were at an event one time when this person asked how much I had paid for it. Obviously, you don't pay for having a park named after you, but I assume, and I don't know how this came about, but I have a feeling that somebody from one of those committees or one of those boards was on the committee that was talking about creating this park and came up with my name. So you know, it's just this interconnectedness that and you don't know how things are going to turn out. But one word of advice is to just join. I mean, get involved at this and work on issues that interest you, because one thing leads to another, and it's part of the learning experience. And you learn and you go on and go on to the next step.
Okay,
I'm not sure I answered your question, but anyway.
That's fine. Thank you. So now Kathleen has some questions that she wants to ask now.
So I'm actually an organizer myself. I'm a youth activist for Boston Youth Organizing Project, and I've done grassroots organizing since I was 15 years old. And something I really like asking people who've organized or who have worked in the professional sphere, especially regarding politics, being a person of color, how does your identity impact your organizing?
How does it? Well, it depends on who you're organizing.
Right.
Yeah, you're right.
So when you're organizing people of color, you know, it just means that there's less explanations that you need to make about any of the struggles that you're in. If you're involved in a organizing by a kind of multiracial group of activists, or a predominantly white group of activists, there's a lot of internal education that just has to happen. But I think, so it depends on the subject matter, or the geography where you're organizing. You know, I had friends who, I mean, there was a whole period when we in the late 60s, early 70s, when we thought that the white people that we asked our white organizing friends that to go organize in the white community, in a sense, and get a sense, because you know what's the interesting thing about white people in the United States is how little they know about white people. I mean, I think that when Trump got elected, you know, I mean, it was just so common to hear white people say they were shocked, right? But I never heard a black person say they were shocked. That, you know, it was just, you know, they were surprised, but they weren't shocked. And you know, and I do think that white people need to figure out a way of studying white people. I mean, it's interesting. You think about it. You know, they because whiteness is the default for how the world should be. The idea of studying white people and is just doesn't dawn on white people. But they will study black people in a minute. They will study Hispanic people in a minute, right? So I want white people to set up a white studies program in all their universities. Yeah. So that's that. But that would be, in terms of race. That's how it would affect. That's how I have experienced it as when I was organized. Yeah.
Frieda, you gonna answer?
I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, I realize you're helping me focus on the difference between when we talk about, Byron and I talk about organizing. And one major difference is that the path that I took ended up including a structure. That is, I went to the Department of Welfare. I went to Roxbury Multi-Service Center, who was an agency. I helped create Alianza, the Spanish Alliance. I worked for Governor Sargent. I then worked for Solomon Carter Fuller Mental Health Center. And my last job was United South End Settlements. So unlike Byron's tract is very interesting. I mean, when you look at the two of us, because he, by very, very few of his experience, except for the museum, had a building. Because when the work that you're doing is connected with a building, a structure, you have a responsibility for that building and all the people who work in it. So you're organizing, and what you do, I mean, you have a responsibility for the maintaining that structure that enables the people that are working there to continue to do the work. So it's very interesting. So obviously the path that he took, which is fabulous, allowed him a lot more flexibility. I mean, he answered to the people who voted for him. They voted for him every 2 years, where and he didn't have sort of the overhead, the structure, the overhead. So part of my responsibility was, yes, responding to the needs, but also at the same time making sure that the basic structure, the salaries for the people. So it just struck me today in this conversation, this difference. You know, you're interviewing us both as sort of active community people, but how different our paths were. Or anyway, that just struck me.
My next set of questions are going to be focused on Mr. Rushing.
Good.
So you left Harvard in your junior year to join the civil rights movement,
Yeah.
and you did grassroots organizing. Do you see any parallels to the civil rights movement then to the civil rights movement today?
Well, if you there's certainly parallels in the work that was that the work took a definite shift when young people got involved in it. I mean, and so I grew up at the period where young people, the Black community had made a decision. So my parents' generation had made a decision that there was going to be no significant change unless there was legal, constitutional change in the United States. And so a tremendous amount of work and energy was focused on the lawyers, on legal cases, and attacking segregation around the edges. And then, of course, the major victory for that strategy was the Supreme Court decision in 1954. And then after that, of course, the resistance by Southerners especially just became so outrageous that people realized that there might not be significant change because of the 1954 decision, and people got energized to work on other strategies toward that end. No one came out. No one said we don't want the schools to be integrated, but they said we also have to do a whole bunch of other things at the same time. And then that of course were the struggles that began in the 1950s of integrating other things in addition to the schools. And most of that was not that was not started out as being legal struggles. It was started out as being struggles on the street. And so that is and that, of course, gets us to the kind of similarities between what's been going on in the past few years about the activity, about direct kinds of activity out in the street, led by young people, in the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, and so that's the similarity. What's interesting, and we'll see. I mean, so the activism of the 60s and 70s, you know, played out to lots of advantages. Lots of things happened, good things happened, but also that it was the first time in that and our generation that we saw the incredible violence of white people all over the United States, and white police, and of course led by police, and so in your generation, you have yet to have the kind of violence that we had on the streets in the 1960s and 1970s. You know, where you know, when what were then called riots, the urban riots in the 60s and 70s. You know, I mean, there has been no demonstration about by Black Lives Matter or by anybody else, where 80 people get killed in a weekend. And so I think that you know, and hopefully people have learned enough that they figured out how not to have that happen again. We, of course, did not know how not to have that happen again. You know, we in Boston, you know, we're you know, Boston's a small city that thinks it's a big city. You know, you know, never trust anybody who thinks they live in a big city. When they live in Boston, they say this is a big city. That don't trust them. They have no clue where they live. So as this moderate sized city, with a relatively small Black population, we had the same kind of violence, but not to the extent that happened in places like New York and Washington and Detroit and Chicago. So our riot was in 1967, which was, you know, when until we could put all of those things together, you know, we, you know, realized that it was like somebody had written a playbook for mayors and police departments on what to do. In Boston, it was just a matter that there is no rational explanation except that the white power and leadership in Boston just decided that they were getting annoyed at what Black people were doing in general in organizing, looked for an excuse and attacked them, and the excuse was a group of progressive women on welfare had taken over the welfare office. They had what in those days were called sit-ins, and they took it over and stayed there for like several days overnight, and then the police just came one afternoon to just throw them all out, and Black people in the community that was enough. They just spontaneously reacted to that, and you had a, you know, relatively for Boston a significant riot for the country. I don't think it made the headlines in any newspaper outside of Boston. Did that answer your question?
Yes, that answered it perfectly. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
So between 1972 and 1985, through my research, you were president of the Museum of African American History.
Yep.
And while you were there, you raised money to purchase.
Yeah, that was a staff position. It was called, I mean, they called it president, but it wasn't like it could have been called the executive director. Yeah, that's true. and then we bought the well, bought the African Meeting House at the beginning of the 70s. And that's what that sort of was the signal of taking the whole level of community, of trying to connect history to the Black community in a significant way, right? I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go on.
You didn't interrupt me. That's honestly kind of the way I wanted you to tell me the story of saving the African Meeting House and what brought you to saving it, and what significant impact do you think it had in Boston by saving it?
Right. So in the early 70s, there was there just was not an institution that was systematically talking about the history of Black people. So Black people learn their history in a variety of ways, but in no systematic way. And then, of course, and of course, the kids, the young people, were, of course, not learning any in school. And so, you know, one of the biggest disadvantages of integrated education is that white people get to run it, and at all levels. And white people did not think there was no interest in telling the history of anybody but white people in most schools in the North. In the South, segregated schools usually meant that you had a disparate amount of financial support for the schools, and that you had and all the control was in the hands of white people. But at the lowest level, at sort of between the teacher and the student, Black people could do anything they wanted in those schools. And one of the things is they taught history. And so young Black people from the South who are moving north knew more Black history than the Black kids in the North going to integrated schools. And that was the lay of the land sort of in Boston, as it was in many northern cities. And so the Museum of African American History was organized in that context, so that there would be a regular place where people would know this. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure everybody knew was the history of Black people over the years in Boston, and that relatively that they weren't always in Roxbury. They lived someplace else before that. They lived 100 years on one side of Beacon Hill, and then white people always were amazed by that, because of course white people always learned that Beacon Hill was a rich neighborhood, and it was only half of it was rich, and the other half was working class, and that's where Black people lived in the 1800s. And one of the first things they did when they moved into their part of Beacon Hill was to build a church. And for a variety of reasons, that building, although the congregations all moved to Roxbury, for a variety of reasons, that building was still standing. It had actually been purchased by a Jewish congregation, because Jews, Eastern European Jews, were moving into working class Beacon Hill just about the time Black people were moving to the South End and to Roxbury. And we were lucky enough that there was a Jewish congregation that liked the building and bought it from the Black congregation that was leaving, and kept it. And then by the 60s, that working class Jewish congregation was almost gone, and they were ready to sell the building, and we heard about it and cut a deal, raised the money and cut a deal, right? And then use that as a center for a whole bunch of education, right?
Well, unfortunately, I have to go now.
Okay, that's
Thank
right.
you so much for your time.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I really appreciated you guys coming out to meet with us today, and I wanted to say thank you for all your work you've done in Boston. You guys are two honorable people who deserve as many awards for what you've done in the community as you guys deserve.
Thank
So
you.
yes, take care, and Amelie will finish off the interview.
Right, and I hope we get to meet sometime.
Right.
Of course, I would love to talk about political theory with you.
Get a sense of your work. Right.
Right.
Yeah, I'll reach out. So thank you so much. Have a good day, guys.
Bye-bye.
So Emily, do you have any other questions?
Yes, I actually have a question for Garcia, if she doesn't mind
Yeah.
answering. So I know you looked at, I might mispronounce this, but the Alianza Hispana, is that correct? Or that organization that you
Sorry, I
worked-
can't hear you.
The organization that you worked with, the Hispana organization, how has that, like, when you worked there, how was that like? And with the people that you've met and the people that you helped with that organization, how did that, like, I guess, influence, or like, how did that make you feel basically with all?
I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, it's okay. I'll repeat myself. The organization that you worked with, the Hispana organization, how did that, like, make you feel with, like, the people you connected with and that you helped with? Like, how was that, like, while you worked there?
Well, it was really a lot of basic needed work that we did. I mentioned earlier Mothers Tutoring Mothers. That was a very unique program where we had mothers tutoring mothers in their apartments. So to make it as easy as possible for women to go to school. But it was a multi-service center is really what it was. But one of the concerns that it's interesting. I mean, you were asking me to look back, and my concern, I have a serious concern right now because a lot of these agencies have disappeared. Roxbury Multi-Service Center doesn't exist anymore. Spanish Alliance does. But a lot of agencies that used to provide these very critical services don't exist anymore. And yet we are living at a time when, I mean, you cannot pick up the newspaper without reading about, in a way, what the pandemic has revealed, which is the number of people who are living in poverty and the needs that are out there. And I don't know who is going to provide the services because and nobody has really documented the number of agencies that have disappeared that existed for the period that we're talking about. That is, everything seems to have changed, begun to change after September 11th. And I don't know what the connection is, but United Way, which used to be a major funder of community-based organizations, hardly exist anymore. And so if the funding isn't there, I mean, obviously we're going to have to come up with some new models because the need exists, and you need to have different ways of addressing the needs. It's been very painful for me during the pandemic to think of as a bilingual person, to try to imagine what these children of Hispanic parents are going through. My mother never learned English, although she worked the whole time she was here. So if I had lived through the pandemic, I mean, knowing my circumstances in New York, I mean, I wouldn't have had access to a computer. I wouldn't have had an adult who knew more than I did to help me through. And I keep thinking of what is going on. Who is addressing these needs? Who is focusing on this reality of what kids are growing up in, and where is the help going to come? So I feel very anxious about what is going on right now, and because I don't see the signs yet of what is being developed to address these issues that exist. I mean, they get documented every single day. You know, I was reading about the that teenager that got shot in, I think it was Ohio. She was in a foster home. And I mean, that article is just full of issues for anybody who cares about people who have needs. She had a grandmother that she desperately wanted to live with. She didn't need to be in a foster home. I'm assuming that something was going on in the foster home that led to her coming out with a knife and ended up being killed. The Ohio, I believe it was in Ohio, would not pay subsidize the grandmother to take care of that, and the grandmother couldn't do it. She had to work, and I mean, it's issues like that. You read stuff like that you say, what is going on, and how is this going to get solved? Because we're talking about not one child, we're talking about a lot of children, and we know that our own child welfare agencies, we've had several deaths. So obviously, things really are a mess right now. And I'm sorry to say this because you're a young person who's about to enter. You have a lot of work to do. So you should get ready because it is extraordinary. And it's a different period. I mean, we're going through an evolution, and I'm not sure. I don't see the beginnings of addressing some of those issues yet. And that concerns me because we are really in trouble for children. I mean, for the next generation. We really have got to do a much, much better job than we are doing on addressing issues of the next generation. School, health, everything. Sorry. I mean, it's just been on my mind for a while.
No, that's good. Thank you. I also agree with that. With like the next generation needs to we need to help them more. So, thank you so much.
So we scheduled an hour for this. So I just wonder if you have any last questions.
Right.
Have you gotten through your list? Yep.
Well, let me just check. 1 second. I might have mentioned this within another question earlier, but what impact do you think you have left Boston? Is a final question. I know I've mentioned that how you feel, but do you think in years to come with what you have done would leave an impact for the future generation in a way?
Yeah, I don't know about Frieda. I'm asked that question a lot, and I say it's not for me to answer. Someone else has to answer that question.
Right.
And I do get annoyed when people answer that question, don't remember that it had anything to do with something. But but so I just saw a note. Oh, it was a note about from a gay activist who's also a Roman Catholic, talking about what's happening in Germany, and that they're blessing these gay unions in the Catholic Church in Germany, and it's all very controversial. But he said in the note, he said he's so glad he comes from Massachusetts where same-sex marriage was made legal. And at least and he said, and we had Byron Rushing as our representative. So that, but essentially, I want other people to answer that question.
Well, thank you so much for this interview.
Okay, and I look forward to it. Now, what are you going to do? Are you writing a paper, or are you putting together something else?
We're putting a final presentation video for a final that we will send to the professor. So
got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you can send me a copy.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I've known you a professor for a long time.
Yeah.
Say hello to him for me too.
So
I
thank
will.
you. We enjoyed it.
Yes. Well, thank you for everything you have done, and it was a pleasure meeting you guys.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Here.
Bye.
Bye.